So first reading was an overview in which you are told what is portfolio management, why is it done, what is portfolio context. Then next, and in overview, we discussed that key objective of portfolio management is to reduce risk. Then in order to reduce risk, you should be able to manage it. And so in second reading, we learned about risk management and how is risk management actually being performed. Now moving on, risk is not the only thing. So when we say risk reduction, we mean that make the same amount of return with a lower amount of risk. So that means the idea is to maximize risk adjusted return and not just to reduce risk. So idea is to maximize risk adjusted return. That means you now need to combine return with risk to be able to decide that what kind of investment should you actually make or how do you take investment decisions. I think that this reading and the reading after that, that is portfolio risk and return part 1, and then reading after that, which is portfolio risk and return part 2. These two readings are the most important readings in this whole topic, because key details are discussed in these readings. And if you look at the end of topic questions, you will find out a large number of questions in these readings. So I think that these two are the most important. And also there are some new concepts being introduced here. So discussing risk and return part 1. So first let's discuss return characteristics, then risk. So in return characteristics, I would not discuss all of these because this is something that we have already discussed in previous topics. So you know what is holding period return, you know what is arithmetic mean, what is geometric mean, what is money weighted return, what is time weighted return, what is annualized return, what is portfolio return. So all of this we have already done over the course, so there is no point going into calculating this again or doing this again. Portfolio return is also simple. So for example, if you have two stocks portfolio X and Y, X made a return of 10%, Y made a return of 15%. X, let's say this is return, let's say X has weight of 60% in portfolio and Y has weight of 40%. So the portfolio return would be weighted average return, which is 60% into 10% plus 15% into 40%. So you multiply return with weight, then add it with product of next return and weight. And if you have 3 stock, 4 stock, you can just keep doing it for all other stocks as well. This is how you calculate portfolio return. Any confusion so far till here? So this is very basic. Other return measures, this is again something that we discussed earlier as well. Gross versus net return. So whenever there is a portfolio being managed, or if there is a portfolio manager managing it, he would be charging some fee. So if you are paying some fee, there are two ways in which you can calculate return. So you can calculate return before fee, which is gross return, or you can calculate return after fee, that is gross minus fee, which is net return. Pre-tax return, after tax return, you already know. So pre-tax is before tax and after tax is after paying tax. Real return, you already know, adjusted for the inflation. So 1 plus real return multiplied by 1 plus inflation equals 1 plus nominal return. So this is the formula, or this is the equation for real return. Or you can simply do real return equals nominal return minus inflation. But this will give you an approximate answer, not the accurate answer. Accurate would come in from this formula. Then leverage return. So sometimes you make investment by borrowing. So for example, you have $100. You want to buy asset X and it has a price of $150. So what you do is you go to market and borrow money of $50. So you are borrowing $50 and putting in 100 of yourself to buy this. So you combine these your 100 with 50 of borrowed money, and you buy asset X for $150. Now when you make a return on asset X, that return would go to you, right? So any return on asset X, let's say that you bought it for 150 and its price increased to, from 150 its price increased to, let's say $165. That means you made a 10% return, or you made a $15 return. So this whole $15 will flow to you. But then again, you borrowed some money. When you borrowed money, you will have to pay some tax or some interest onto it. And when you pay that interest, that will be a cost to you. So let's say that the interest rate on $50 was 5%. So if interest rate is 5%, that means you will end up paying $2.5 of interest. So you made $15, but you paid interest of $2.5. So what do you get? Eventually you get $12.5. So your investment was $100 and you made $12.5 on this $100. So that means your return is 12.5%. This is known as leveraged return. So leveraged return is that when you borrow money. So this is net of interest cost. Any questions so far or any confusions? Okay, moving on to risk characteristics. Again, variance we have discussed earlier. Standard deviation we have discussed earlier already. That how do you calculate it? We discussed calculating it using calculator as well, financial calculator as well, and using formula as well. Now the question is about calculating risk of portfolio or variance of portfolio. So let's say that you have a portfolio of two assets X and Y. Or let's say 1 and 2 to be easier. So first asset and second asset, 1 and 2. So how do you calculate the variance of that portfolio? So for calculating variance of that portfolio, this formula is used. Remember this formula, memorize this formula. This is very, very important. So what is the formula? You say that variance of portfolio is equal to weight of first asset squared multiplied by variance of first asset plus weight of second asset squared multiplied by variance of second asset plus 2 into weight 1 into weight 2 into covariance of these two assets. This is the formula. Remember the formula. Now let's say that you do not have covariance, but instead of covariance you have correlation. So recall from earlier classes, covariance is equal to correlation is equal to covariance divided by standard deviation of A into standard deviation of B. If you have two assets, you take their covariance and divide them by the standard deviation of first one into standard deviation of second one. That gives you the correlation of those two assets. So that means covariance is equal to correlation into standard deviation of A into standard deviation of B. So if you have covariance, you put it in here. If you do not have covariance, instead if you have correlation, then you replace covariance with this correlation into standard deviation of 1 into standard deviation of 2. So this is actually calculating covariance. So there is no change in formula, only difference is that if you have correlation, then you first calculate covariance and then put it in here. Any problem? So this is variance. If you have to calculate standard deviation is a square root of variance. So you just take the square root and that becomes standard deviation. So remember this formula, this is very important. Moving on calculation, you just do this example once so that you know how to apply the formula. So moving on, other investment characteristics. Other investment characteristics include distribution characteristics and market characteristics. Within distribution, we have normal distribution, we have distribution with skewness, with kurtosis. So this is something that we have already discussed in quant, that what is normal distribution, what is skewness, what is kurtosis. Market characteristics include informational efficiencies that we discussed in equity when we discussed EMH, efficient market hypothesis. Operational efficiencies. Informational efficiencies means that how quickly does information gets priced into the prices or market. Operational means lower cost, so lower transaction cost or whatever, and indirectly would mean higher liquidity as well, because if liquidity is higher, then transaction costs are lower. Other characteristics, that is analyst coverage. If there are more analysts covering something, then liquidity is higher or market is more efficient. Information availability, firm size, etc. So all these are other characteristics that contribute to return and risk, that contribute to risk characteristics, or that help analyze the risk. So normal distribution we have discussed earlier in quant quite a lot of times. So let's move on. Market characteristics, operational efficiencies, we have discussed that this relates to cost of trading. If costs are lower, operational efficiencies will be higher. Liquidity is also related to operational efficiency. Why? Because if liquidity is lower, then costs are higher. If cost is higher, of transaction is higher, then operational efficiency is lower. Lower liquidity can lead to high bid-ask spreads as well. So the liquidity can have two kinds of impact on the cost of transaction. First is related to bid-ask spread. So bid-ask spread can be wide or can be higher for if this asset is illiquid. Secondly, second scenario relates to the example that we just discussed a few minutes back, which is that if the liquidity is lower, then when you go to sell an asset in the market, maybe you do not get the right price, or maybe you have to sell it at a lower price. And when you go to buy it, maybe you have to buy at a higher price, which is known as price impact of liquidity. That is, let's say price is currently $100, but when you place a buy order, let's say it goes to 102. Or when you place a sell order, let's say it goes to 98. This is known as price impact. So if volumes are lower in a market or trading activity is lower, then liquidity will be a bigger concern. Why? Because liquidity will be lower. If volumes are higher, liquidity will be higher. If credit quality is bad or low, liquidity will also be low. If credit quality is better, liquidity will be better. So all these would eventually or indirectly contribute to operational efficiencies. Moving on, risk aversion and portfolio selection. So now the question is that which portfolio should you select? So there is an investor A who likes taking risk. There is an investor B who doesn't like risk. So this means that this investor B will be more satisfied by avoiding risk, and investor A will be more satisfied by taking risk. So this means different investors have different characteristics, and due to their different characteristics, their aversion to risk can be different. That is, some may be more averse to risk and some may be less averse to risk, and some may like the risk. So if their aversion is different, that means the satisfaction that they derive from investment would also be different. So B would be more satisfied investing into low risk asset. A will be more satisfied investing into high risk asset. So when you are selecting investment for investor, when an investor is investing, then a key element to look at is the investor satisfaction. That how satisfied would investor be with respect to that investment. So maybe there is an investment which produces highest return with respect to risk, or which gives you highest Sharpe ratio. But maybe that does not satisfy investor. Why? Because maybe investor wants to take more risk. So satisfaction would depend on investor's own characteristics, that of aversion. So investor satisfaction depends on three factors. One is return, that is normal. So any investors or satisfaction would depend on return. Second is risk, which is again normal. Any investors satisfaction would depend on risk. And third is aversion to risk, that how much does he dislike risk. These are the three parameters through which satisfaction can be gauged or satisfaction can be measured. And when we say satisfaction, another name for satisfaction is utility. So how do you calculate utility? Formula for utility is expected return minus half into aversion coefficient into variance. Remember this formula, this is important. So this is how you measure the utility, which means that any investor would want to always maximize utility, or any investor should invest into the assets which maximize utility for that particular investor. That means any investor would always want to maximize utility. Now, different investors can have different characteristics. Let's say there is an investor who likes risk, who is risk seeking. If an investor is risk seeking or risk loving, they would be more satisfied by taking more risk. So they would have maximum utility if risk is higher. If let's say there is an investor is risk neutral. Risk neutral means that he does not care about risk. What he only cares about is return. So his utility will be higher for the investment in which return is highest, no matter what the risk is. And risk loving would have the highest utility in the investment where risk is highest, no matter what the return is. And risk averse investor would have higher utility with when return is high and risk is low. Any problem so far?
What was A again?
Sorry? Aversion coefficient. So this is a measure of aversion, that how averse is an individual to the risk. So if he is more averse, this will be higher. If he is less averse, this will be lower. And if he is risk lover, then this will be negative. That means if risk increases, he is more satisfied. Key point to note again from the basics of economics, that in economics you would have learned consumer utility. So same concept is applied here to investor. So you would have learned that utility does not indicate or measure satisfaction. This is not a measure. So if I come up with an answer of 10, this doesn't tell me anything. But this 10 can be compared to other utility. So I can tell that this utility of 10 is higher than another utility which is 8. So I can make an order which one is high, which one is low. But in itself it doesn't tell me anything. So it can help form the order. Moving on. So again, something based on consumer utility concepts of economics. So what is indifference curve? Indifference curve is a graph which has same utility throughout the graph. So for example, if I tell you that if an investor gets 10% return and he gets with 5% risk, then he will have a utility of, let's say, for example, 10 or whatever. Then I tell you that if he gets 15% return with a standard deviation of, let's say, 8%, he will also, with this combination, he would again have a utility of 10. So investor can drive same level of satisfaction with different combinations, right? Why? Because as he increases return, utility will increase, but as he increases risk, utility will decrease. So there can be different risk and return combination which can give same level of satisfaction. So if I form a curve which shows all the possible combinations for a specific level of satisfaction, let's say 10, then that is known as indifference curve. So an indifference curve is the curve on which utility will be constant. So if I take this, it will give me 10 utility. If I take this combination, again give me 10. If I take this combination, again 10. So no matter what combination I take on this curve, utility will be same. Similarly, I can make another indifference curve with another utility. Let's say this is 10, this is 12. I can make another one, let's say with 15. So higher the indifference curve, higher is the utility. And throughout the indifference curve, utility is constant. So utility wouldn't change through the indifference curve, but would change if I shift the indifference curve. Which means that any investor would want to go towards the highest indifference curve in order to get the highest utility. Is it clear? These are the graphical illustrations of different indifference curves of various types of investors. So a risk averse investor would have indifference curve like this. Why? Because he will need more return for taking lesser risk. Moderate risk aversion, for the same level of return, For the same level of risk, he would need a lower return. He would need a lower return. So that means he would need extra return for extra risk, but he can go with even a lower return compared to high risk aversion investor. So let's say if you are taking 1% risk, this investor may demand 2% extra return. And if you are taking 1% risk again, this investor may demand 1.5% return. And lower would demand maybe, let's say, 0.5% return. Risk neutral is the one which wouldn't care about the risk. He would just care about the return. And risk lover would be the one who would take higher risk even if return is lower, because all he cares about is risk and not the return. Any confusion so far? So remember these diagrams as well. Do this question, calculate utility. Formula for utility is expected return minus half into A into standard variance. So calculate utility. Okay, so let's move on. Application of utility theory to portfolio selection. So you know what is expected return already. You know how to calculate risk. Moving on to Cal. What is Cal? So there is a theory which says that any investor, or general finance theory, investment theory, is that any investor would hold one risky asset and one risk-free asset. So that means you will make a portfolio of one component of the portfolio will be risk-free investment and another would be risky investment. This risky can be market portfolio or any risky asset. So that means it will be a proportion of these two. So if I take this portfolio and plot return against risk, when I say risk, I mean standard deviation. So I plot again return against risk. Then if my standard deviation is 0, that would mean a risk-free asset. So for example, I tell you that risk-free rate is 5%. So that means when standard deviation is 0, return will be 5%. Now I can take another point. So for example, I tell you that if you take 10% of standard deviation in this portfolio, if this portfolio has a 10% of standard deviation, then its return, or let's say, for example, we have a portfolio of risk-free asset and risky asset. So what can be the different combinations? Different combinations can be so you have a risk-free asset and a risky asset in a portfolio. So what can be the different combination? So for example, I can invest whole of the amount in risk-free asset and 0% in risky. Or I can invest 90% here, 10% here. Or I can invest 100% here and 0% here. So at each of these combinations, my return will be different, portfolio return will be different, and standard deviation will be different. As I go down, I am taking more and more risk. Why? Because I am investing more in risky asset. The standard deviation will keep going up, but I will make more return as well, because return of risky investment will be higher. So if I have to plot all these combinations, all the possible combination, how can I plot it? I can plot all these possible combination using a line which is known as capital allocation line. So what I do is, first I assume that I am investing everything in risk-free asset. So if I make 100% investment in risk-free asset, I will earn risk-free rate of return. Let's say that is 5%. Then I assume that I will make all the investment in risky asset. That is 100% will be invested in risky asset. When I invest 100% in risky asset, I will get the return of risky asset with the standard deviation of risky asset. And let's say I tell you that return of risky asset is 15%. and standard deviation is 12%. So you can plot another point, 15% and 12%, right? And then you can join these points and plot a straight line. This is known as capital allocation line. So capital allocation line is kind of a budget line, you can say. It would tell you all the possible combinations that can exist. So it can tell you that by using this risk-free asset and this risky asset, you can form all these possible combinations. So you can take 5% return with no risk, you can take 15% with 12% risk, or let's say you can take 10% return with, for example, 6% risk, and so on. So all these combinations, Cal will tell you all the possible combinations that are there to be achieved. Now recall from our earlier discussion, what we discussed was that any investor would want to go to highest indifference curve, correct? So let's say there is an investor who has these indifference curves. So any investor would want to go to highest indifference curve. So that means he would want to operate here. So let's say I tell you that this is the curve which shows a combination of 20% return with 5% risk. So investor would be most satisfied if you give him 20% return with 5% risk. But maybe this combination does not exist in market. Why? Because combinations that exist in market are demonstrated by Cal. So if anything is above Cal, that is not achievable. That does not exist. So although investor has more satisfaction from it, but that is not achievable. So that means maximum an investor can achieve is Cal. So an investor would want to go to higher and higher indifference curve, but he would go to an indifference curve as high as Cal only. So investor would invest at a point where Cal becomes tangential to the indifference curve. Why? Because anything lower this would have lower utility. Anything above this is not achievable or unachievable. So this is known as investor optimal portfolio. Remember, this is investor optimal portfolio, not the optimal portfolio. Maybe on risk adjusted basis it is not optimal, maybe it does not have highest Sharpe ratio, but for investor it is most optimal because investor is most satisfied at this portfolio. And different investors have different aversion. So different investors can have different optimal portfolios. So one investor may have this portfolio as optimal, another investor may see portfolio K as optimal. So for different investors, different portfolios might be optimal. Any problem so far? Moving on, portfolio of two risky assets. So we discussed this earlier, that why do we combine assets? To reduce risk. How is risk reduced? Risk is reduced because correlation between assets is lower. If correlation is lower, risk will be reduced, otherwise it will not be reduced. So that means if correlation is 1, that means if both are perfectly correlated, then there will be no risk reduction. If correlation between the assets is lower, then there will be risk reduction. That means you can make the same level of return at a lower risk. Previously you were making, let's say, for example, let's say previously you were making 11% return for 20% risk. Now you can make 11% return for 15% risk. Why? Because the assets that you have in portfolio have low correlation. So if one goes up, other will go down. So you can make same return with lower standard deviation. If let's say that they have much lower correlation, correlation is 0.2, then you can make same return at even lower risk, let's say 12%. And then let's say that if they are perfectly negatively correlated, then you can make same return at even lower risk. Or you can even reach to a point where risk is eliminated, lowest, due to different correlation. Market risk will be there, but non-systematic risk can be minimized. Or if let's say that markets are different and two assets are perfectly correlated, they are perfectly negatively correlated, A goes up, B goes down, no matter what. So then risk will become 0. So if two assets are perfectly negatively correlated, if one goes up, other goes down, then risk can be completely eliminated. But when there is a recession, let's say when there is a recession, this negative correlation can turn into a positive correlation, because then everything will be falling. So in that scenario, this may increase. But in an ideal scenario, if you are able to find any such asset, which is not very practical, that for those two assets which have perfect negative correlation, then risk will be, you can reach to a point where risk is 0, uncertainty is 0. This is just an example to calculate variance that you can go do later. Moving on, so far we have discussed portfolio of two assets. So we discussed portfolio of, let's say, X and Y, and we discussed how do you calculate variance. You can calculate variance using a formula, using this formula W1 into variance, W1 is squared into variance 1, W2 is squared into variance 2 plus 2 into covariance into W1 into W2. This was the formula for variance. But this is for two assets. If you have three assets, then you need to make more combination. Then W will have to make a combination of W3 as well, then W3 with W1 and W2 with W3. So this list will increase. Then with four assets, this will increase even from that. So that means the formula will keep getting bigger and bigger and complex and complex. So moving on, there is another way to find portfolio risk of portfolio of many assets. So for example, if you are told, if you are given average covariance of assets and if you are given average variance of assets, let's say there are 10 stocks or 10 assets in a portfolio, you are told their average covariance and their average variance. So if you know their average variance and average covariance, you can calculate variance of portfolio using this formula, which is n minus 1 divided by n, variance divided by n into covariance. So average variance divided by n plus n minus 1 divided by n into average covariance. So if you know average covariance and if you know average variance, you can calculate variance of portfolio. Any problem so far up till here? If you do not have covariance, so what you do is correlation into standard deviation of A into standard deviation of B. But that wouldn't be applicable here. Why? Because you wouldn't know the standard deviation of other all the assets. Why? Because there are 10 assets. So as there are 10 assets, you wouldn't know if the average of all the standard deviations is same or not. So moving on, this is first case. Another scenario can be in which you are told that assets also have same correlation among them. So if you are told that their correlation, the correlation amongst them is also same, then you can use another formula as well. So then what you can do is you can convert this covariance into, if correlation for everything is same, then you can take that one number of correlation. You wouldn't require 10, 20 numbers of correlation. So you can take that and multiply it by variance. And you can, that means you can replace covariance with correlation into variance, and that will give you, that can give you the variance of portfolio. So these are two formulas, actually one formula, both are similar, only difference will be the availability of data. If you have correlation, you just multiply it with variance and replace covariance with that. But that can only be used if correlation is same among all the securities. Otherwise, you cannot just take any one correlation and apply it. If all are same, then you can use this, otherwise you cannot. Moving on, power of diversification. This we have already discussed, that lower correlation can help with diversification. Diversification can help make higher return with the lower risk. How do you diversify? You can diversify with asset classes. So for example, invest into some portion in equity, some in fixed income, some in commodities, some in real estate. Or you can diversify with index fund. Within equity, instead of buying a stock X, Y, and Z, have a exposure to whole market. So probably invest into S&P 500 index instead of buying as a few assets. Diversification among countries, that is invest in multiple countries. Diversify by not owning your employer's stock. So the assumption is that if you are doing a job, if your employer performs well, then you will get higher rewards. So that means if employer is performing well, your rewards will be higher. But if employer is doing bad, your rewards will be lower. And also its stock, employer's stock will also move in same direction as its performance. If employer performs well, stock price will also increase, your rewards will also increase. That means your rewards from employer and the stock both have positive correlation. So in order for you to diversify, you should not own your employer's stock, because for diversification, correlation should be lower or negative. Buy insurance for risky portfolios. So these are the avenues for diversification or reducing risk. Now the question is that how do you decide whether a new asset should be added to a portfolio or not? So let's say that you have a portfolio. It gives you 10% return with a 6% risk. 10% return and 6% risk. There is a new stock which you are planning to add. It gives you, let's say, 12% return and 7% risk. So now the question is, should you add this portfolio or should you not add this portfolio? Or let's say, it gives you 9% return and 5% risk or 6% risk. Now the question is, should you add this portfolio or not add this portfolio? So this to portfolio. So this is the new stock X. So you look at its return and you find out that this is giving you a lower return compared to portfolio return. So which would mean that you should not add it. And the risk is also same. But by adding it, maybe it has negative correlation with other securities. And due to that negative correlation, maybe it is able to reduce risk. And by reducing risk, maybe it is able to give you higher Sharpe ratio. And what is Sharpe ratio? Sharpe ratio is risk adjusted return. So maybe it is able to give you higher risk adjusted return. That means you cannot only look at the risk or return to decide whether a security or asset should be included in portfolio or not. You should look at the correlation of that asset with other securities as well. So both of these should be taken into account. The risk adjusted return of that asset compared to the risk adjusted return of portfolio, and also the correlation of that asset with the portfolio. So how do you decide that? So you use a basic theory or formula which says that if Sharpe ratio of new asset is greater than Sharpe ratio of portfolio multiplied by correlation of portfolio with new asset, then add the asset, otherwise do not add the asset. So if Sharpe ratio of new asset is greater than Sharpe ratio of portfolio multiplied by correlation of new asset with portfolio, then add it, otherwise do not add it. Any problem so far? So moving on, efficient frontier and investors optimal portfolio. So as we discussed, remember that we made some investment opportunity set earlier. That was in here. So we made an investment opportunity set that is different combinations of assets, that is having, for example, 20% in X, 80% in Y, or having, let's say, 80% in Y and 20% in X. Different combination can give you different return for different level of risk. So that same opportunity set is plotted here again. So it will tell you different allocations and different allocations which you can do to arrive at different return and risk combinations with a specific group of risky assets. So all of these are risky assets or risky portfolios. So this graph which tells you about all these combinations is known as investment opportunity set. That is what opportunities are available, what allocation or what kind of returns and risk combinations are available in the market using the risky asset. Now when you are making this graph, maybe you get, let's say, 10% return for 8% risk. So maybe there are different assets available. Let's say there are 10 assets and you are allocating them with different proportions to arrive at a return and a risk. So maybe you make a combination which gives you 10% return with 8% risk. And maybe you make another combination which gives you again 10% return but at 12% risk. Another combination which gives you 10% return at 11% risk. So you can make different combinations to get 10% return, and risk may be different depending on the selection of assets. So but when you are plotting this graph, investment opportunity set, it only takes what you do is that you plot everything. So you have plotted this 10% for 8%, and then this another, you have plotted another point which tells you 10% for 12% and so on. If I plot only the graph with minimum variances, that is what can be the minimum variance for 10% return, what can be the minimum variance for 12% return, what can be the minimum variance for 8% return, then that is known as minimum variance frontier. So minimum variance frontier is that opportunity set in which you plot only the assets with or only the combinations with minimum variance. So you plot what is the minimum variance to generate 10% return, what is the minimum variance to generate 12%, what is the minimum variance to generate 8% return, and so on. Any confusion so far? This is minimum variance frontier. So all of these have minimum variance for given level of return. Now within these, which one has the lowest variance? Lowest variance is this point, let's say G. This has lowest variance, or Z, portfolio Z. It has lowest variance. Why? Because there is nothing on left of it. It has the lowest variance among all. Variance is on x-axis, standard deviation is on x-axis. So this one has the lowest standard deviation. It is the leftmost portfolio. This is known as global minimum variance portfolio. So the portfolio at this turning point of minimum variance frontier is known as global minimum variance portfolio. That means it is the portfolio with the minimum variance. Any questions so far? Now next, this is all minimum frontier. Now next thing to note is that let's say that you are taking a risk of 10%. For 10% risk, you have a combination available which gives you 5% return. There is a combination available which gives you 15% return. So which one will you choose? You will obviously go for 15% return. Why? Because for if you are taking same amount of risk, you would want to go for higher return. So that means you will only go for combinations which are above this turning point. So this graph above this turning point is known as efficient frontier. So this upper part of minimum variance frontier is known as efficient frontier because this comprise all the efficient allocation. Any confusion so far? Now next key point to note is that any points above efficient frontier are not achievable, and any point below efficient frontier would be inefficient. So you would only invest on efficient frontier because anything below it is inefficient. You have better option available, and anything above it is unachievable because these are the options that you have available in market. Using the risky portfolio, you can make a maximum of this much of return. You do not have any other options available. At times, what investor do is that at times you would see that some investor would still keep some inefficient assets in their portfolio. So let's say maybe gold is here, but they may still keep gold in their portfolio. Why is that so? Because some assets like commodities like gold, maybe they give lower return for higher standard deviation, but still they provide a benefit of diversification. Their correlation with traditional investment is very low, and so in times of losses and times when traditional investment is falling, they may provide certain hedge, or they can provide certain hedge against inflation as well. So due to those reasons, at times even the inefficient assets are also kept in a portfolio. Why? Because they help reduce risk of the overall portfolio due with diversification. So now the question is that this is your efficient frontier. Within this efficient frontier, you have different risky portfolios. This is your CAL. We discussed that any investor would invest in a risk-free asset and a risky. So these all are risky. This is risk-free. Now the question is, where would an investor operate, or what will be the optimal risky portfolio? So optimal risky portfolio would be the one at which CAL becomes tangential to efficient frontier. This is the portfolio with highest Sharpe ratio. So remember, this is optimal risky portfolio. The other one which we discussed was optimal investor portfolio. Optimal investor portfolio is the one where indifference curve, where CAL becomes tangential to indifference curve. Optimal risky is the one where CAL becomes tangential to efficient frontier. So if I make indifference curve of an investor, let's say this is an indifference curve of an investor. So this will be investor optimal portfolio. So investor optimal portfolio can be different from optimal risky portfolio or market optimal portfolio. Any problem so far? Okay, two funds theorem is what we have discussed, that any investor would keep a risk-free asset and a risky asset. There is a question, which of the above points is not achievable? So anything above CAL is not achievable. So A is not achievable. Which of these portfolios will not be chosen by rational risk averse investor? So if an investor is risk averse, he will not choose those portfolios which are inefficient. So for example, C and G. Why? Because he knows that for the same level of risk he can get higher return. So he will not choose C or G. Which of these portfolios is most suitable for risk neutral investor? If an investor is risk neutral, he wouldn't care about risk. All he care about is return. So he will go for the portfolio which offers highest return, no matter what the risk is. Gold is in the inefficient part of feasible set. Nonetheless, gold is owned by many rational investors as part of larger portfolio. Why? This we have already discussed, due to diversification benefits and inflation hedge. What is the utility of an investor at point P with risk aversion coefficient of 3? So at point P you can find out the return, you can find out the standard deviation, you have the aversion, you can calculate the utility. Formula for utility is simply expected return, which in this case is 16%, minus half into A, which is 3, multiplied by variance. You can find out the variance from here. It will be approximately 0.19 or 0.18 squared. This is standard deviation, you square it and it becomes variance. So you can find out the utility. Any problem so far? Because we have already discussed that for an investor, this will be the optimal portfolio. This is optimal investor portfolio, and this is optimal risky portfolio. This P is the portfolio with highest Sharpe ratio or highest risk adjusted return. Any questions so far?